Have you ever imagined what it would feel like to approach a beach knowing that within the next few hours, thousands of men might die beside you? Have you ever pictured yourself staring at the horizon and seeing nothing but a dark strip of land, while the sky slowly begins to lighten, revealing smoke drifting in the distance and flashes of fire along the shoreline? Have you ever stood inside a steel landing craft, surrounded by other young men, just as terrified as you are, gripping your rifle with hands wet not only from the sea spray, but from sweat? What if you were 18 years old? What if this was your first real combat experience? When that ramp drops, would you step forward or would you freeze? And what if there is no time to decide? In the early hours of June 6th, 1944, the English Channel became the stage for the largest amphibious invasion in human history. The sea was rough. The wind cut sharply across anxious faces. More than 5,000 vessels moved through the darkness toward the coast of Normandy. Battleships, destroyers, troop transports, landing craft, an entire armada of steel pushing across black water before sunrise. What was about to happen was not just another battle. It was the opening of a decisive front that could determine the future of the war in Europe. Hours before the first soldier touched the sand, thousands of paratroopers had already been dropped behind enemy lines. They jumped into darkness, flying through anti-aircraft fire, low clouds, and total confusion. Many were scattered far from their designated drop zones. Some landed in flooded fields and drowned under the weight of their own gear. Others came down isolated, surrounded by German troops, forced to fight the moment they hit the ground. Their mission was clear: disrupt communications, destroy bridges, delay reinforcements. But in reality, each small group had to adapt, improvise, and turn chaos into opportunity. Meanwhile, along the beaches of Normandy, German defenses stood ready. Reinforced concrete bunkers were positioned strategically on elevated ground. Machine gun nests had wide fields of fire over open sand. Artillery pieces were calibrated to hit ships still offshore. Metal obstacles and mines were scattered across the tidal flats, designed to turn low tide into a killing zone. The defensive plan was simple: stop the invasion before it could even begin. When the first waves of naval bombardment struck the coast, towering columns of smoke rose into the sky. Allied aircraft roared overhead, dropping explosives on identified targets. But limited visibility, drifting smoke, and the sheer scale of the operation meant that many fortified positions remained intact. As the landing craft moved closer, it became painfully clear much of the enemy firepower was still waiting at Omaha Beach. What unfolded in the first hours was devastating. The moment the ramps dropped, German machine guns opened fire in relentless bursts. Men in the front rows were cut down before they could even step forward. Some were killed inside the boats. Others jumped into the water, only to find it deeper than expected. Carrying over 70 pounds of gear, many sank almost immediately. Those who managed to resurface struggled toward shore as bullets snapped across the surface around them. The sound was overwhelming. Explosions, gunfire, screams, orders swallowed by chaos. Artillery shells slammed into the sand, throwing debris and bodies into the air. Medics tried to drag the wounded toward any scrap of cover they could find. Officers were killed in the opening minutes, leaving units disoriented and leaderless. The careful planning that had taken months seemed to dissolve under the raw brutality of reality. And yet, in the middle of that chaos, something began to take shape. Small groups of soldiers started gathering behind steel obstacles and bomb craters. Sergeants took command when captains fell. Grenades were hurled toward elevated positions. Men crawled inch by inch across open sand, searching for blind spots in enemy fire. Every movement was a calculation, advance or die where you lay. While Omaha suffered intense resistance, the other beaches faced their own battles. At Utah, strong currents pushed troops off their intended landing zone. But ironically, this placed them in a sector with lighter defenses. At Juneau, Canadian forces fought through heavy fire as they pushed inland. At Gold and Sword, British troops battled fiercely to secure ground before German reinforcements could organize an effective counterattack. Each sector had its own version of hell, but all shared the same mission: establish a foothold strong enough to sustain the invasion. Above Omaha, the fight turned into desperate close-quarters combat. Many German bunkers were built to face the sea, powerful against frontal assault, but vulnerable from the sides. Small Allied groups began maneuvering along the flanks, climbing under heavy fire. Some used shell craters as temporary cover. Others advanced in pairs, covering one another step by step. When the first machine gun positions were finally silenced from behind, a narrow and fragile opening appeared. Out at sea, Allied destroyers made bold decisions. They moved dangerously close to shore, risking mines and coastal artillery in order to fire directly into visible fortifications. It was a calculated gamble, but their precise firepower helped neutralize positions that were inflicting massive casualties on the beach. Every bunker destroyed meant lives saved. As the hours passed, reinforcements continued landing. The tide slowly rose, washing over bodies and abandoned equipment scattered across the sand. The scene was horrific, but gradually, what seemed like total disaster began shifting toward real progress. German communication lines were disrupted in key areas. Isolated positions found themselves cut off from support. Small victories began linking together, but by midday, the situation was still dangerous, but no longer pure collapse. The beachhead was forming. Tanks that successfully landed provided critical support. Heavy equipment was dragged into defensive positions. Units reorganized from the confusion of the early assault, but D-Day did not end at the shoreline. The Norman countryside presented new challenges. Dense hedgerows turned fields into natural fortresses. Narrow roads became potential ambush points. Villages had to be cleared building by building. German counterattacks threatened to push the Allies back into the sea. The tension never truly lifted. As evening approached, the intensity shifted but did not disappear. Sporadic gunfire echoed across the fields. Makeshift casualty stations overflowed with wounded. Survivors sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had endured. Some stared out at the ocean as more ships arrived. Others looked inland, knowing they would soon have to move again. When night finally fell on June 6th, the Allies held positions across all 5 beaches. It was not a clean victory. It was not the end of the war, but it was something monumental. A door had been forced open. A real, tangible breach in what it seemed like an impenetrable fortress. Occupied Europe was no longer unreachable. In the days that followed, the fighting intensified across the Norman countryside. Progress was slow and costly. Every hedgerow concealed danger. Every village required determination and sacrifice. But the critical objective had been achieved. The Allies had secured a foothold in France. The strategic impact was immense. German forces were now forced to fight under mounting pressure in the west. Resources had to be divided. Momentum shifted. From that day forward, the war's trajectory began to tilt in a way that could not be reversed. Yet perhaps the true meaning of D-Day lies not only in strategy or scale, but in individual choices. In the soldier who advanced despite shaking hands. In a non-commissioned officer who rallied scattered men under fire. In a medic who ignored incoming rounds to save a stranger. And the paratrooper who held a crossroads through the night without knowing if help would arrive. If you close your eyes and imagine that beach at dawn before the first shot was fired, you might see only sand and sea. But by nightfall, that same stretch of coastline carried the weight of history. Not because it was flawless, not because it was easy, but because it was decisive. D-Day was brutal. It was chaotic. It was painfully costly. But it marked the moment when collective courage began outweighing collective fear. It was the point where thousands of individual decisions to step forward reshaped the course of the war. And when we remember June 6th, 1944, we should remember that it wasn't just armies that landed on those shores. It was a generation tested under unimaginable pressure. They did not know how long the war would last. They did not know what still awaited them. But they knew they had done something that would echo through history. Sometimes history doesn't change because of grand speeches or single dramatic orders. Sometimes it changes because ordinary men, standing at the edge of the impossible, choose to take one more step forward.